could have received a better introduction, so thank you so much for that. And we are very excited today to be talking to users and clients of InterDyn BMI and introduce you to excuse me, AP automation with AvidXchange. And as Kim said, we're really excited to be at your Houston and Minneapolis events coming up later next month, and could not be more excited to be a partner with InterDyn BMI as well. My name is Paul Turec. I'm the Director of Reseller Sales for AvidXchange, so I work with folks like Kim and other folks at InterDyn BMI to help users understand the benefits of AP automation and where it makes sense to bring us in on a Dynamics deployment. And so let's talk about what we are going to go over today. So first of all, just the facts. We're going to talk about AP automation and the problems we solve for, and maybe some of the situations you all are in and the reason you're on the call today. And then secondly, what is accounts payable automation? So we want to give you a definition of what we do, what the benefits are of automating your accounts payable and your payments, and then we're going to give you a brief demonstration of the software, both the invoice automation as well as the electronic payment automation for you, and then we're going to wrap up with a quick Q&A. As Kim said, please feel free to type in any questions you have along the way, and we'd love to answer those near the end. So let's go ahead and get started. First, let's just go over some digiknows, and this may be similar to some of your organizations today, but 53% of AP departments today list AP automation as a top priority. And so they're looking to get rid of the paper, they're looking to be more efficient, and there's all sorts of advantages that come with automating an invoice and payment process. So 76% of those invoices are paper and require all that manual processing, and that just means more time that gets spent in areas where you could otherwise be focusing on growing the business or doing your job. And 81% of B2B AP payments are frequently paper checks. And unfortunately, paper checks bring a host of other issues of their own that can negatively affect a company, one of which being opening the door to fraudulent activity, not to mention just the cost associated with processing those. I'd welcome any of you to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you do follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see that I'm regularly posting newspaper articles and articles from the web that detail, unfortunately, fraudulent activity and embezzlement that happens where there could be better and stricter financial controls and payment processes where those could have been avoided. Recently, in Kansas City, where I reside, there was a story of a $5 million embezzlement that was mostly the result of paper checks and forging signatures. And so we're going to talk to you today about how you'll still have that control that you're hoping to have today through those checks and the signatures that go on them, but give you a non-paper form of payment that is much more secure. So the reason that clients look to automate their AP and their payments is that, frankly, they're big, expensive pain points. And so you can see that this study from PayStream Advisors in 2015 details what those pain points are. And so a lot of times it's around trying to reduce the labor and processing costs in having to deal with those paper invoices and paper checks. Some of them are wanting quicker approval cycles, and some of them are just looking to be able to make their payments on time. It might be just as simple as having difficulties with late payments going out and paying those expensive fees that go along with them. These are just a handful of the problems that we solve for clients who choose AvidXchange for their AP automation solution. So really what we want you to think about today is what factors are driving your company to consider AP automation. So the assumption is that if AP automation wasn't something that was on the radar screen, you probably wouldn't be on the call today. And so we want you to think in terms of your own organization. We want you to be in your own shoes as you go through this and think of ways that we can help you make your company operate more efficiently and more securely. So we're going to start out with a first audience poll, and Kim is going to launch this here in just a moment. But how many invoices do you all process per month? We'd like to ask that just so we can get an idea of perhaps what your volume is. So Kim, I'll let you go ahead and launch that.
All right, here we go, everybody. Get ready to push the button. And we will go ahead and share the results. 45% of you are doing it. All right, up to 64%. I feel like I'm doing a horse race.
Yeah, what's the tote board look like?
All right, we're going to get ready to push down this vote. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Looks like 82% of you know the answer. So let's go ahead it looks like there is a smaller volume of 1 to 500. 22% are in the other two brackets.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much to everyone for taking the time to answer that question, and we'll go ahead and move further through the webinar today. And so really, let's get into the meat and potatoes of what is AP automation. What is it that we do to help our clients better solve those problems that we've talked about related to the invoices and payments that they process. So this next slide probably looks familiar to many of you, and this is a automated process that's more manual. So for many folks, the invoice comes in, it's probably through the mail, it might be email, but regardless, the mail gets opened one way or another. It gets routed around the office. Someone's got to code it and approve it and key it into an accounting system. Eventually a check is likely cut, and then an invoice gets filed away for later research for when audit time rolls around or any other question around the invoice itself. Now this next slide you see here, this is an AvidXchange automated process. Now everywhere we see our AvidXchange logo, this is where a manual process has been taken over by our technology. Now one thing that we always stress is that the automation is really only as good as the time it frees up. So now whoever is doing these more manual tasks can be freed up instead to work on activities that help the department and the company as a whole, because there's just no more paper, there's no more opening the mail, there's no more having to route anything around an office, nobody has to additionally key anything into an accounting system, and there's no checks to cut if you don't want to, and there's no invoices to file away because everything is captured digitally within the AvidXchange software and available to be researched through the software at any given time, and we'll give you a quick look into how that works as we proceed through the webinar. So our goal is to get rid of that paper, give you that time back, and put a fully coded, fully approved AP transaction directly into your GP system today, or whatever Dynamics accounting system you might be using. So let's go over the reasons why clients automate. So we talked a little about the problems, and they're usually related to the same reasoning why they choose to automate. And number one is it just simply saves you money as an organization. So when you look at the cost comparison of automating a paper invoice or payment versus using automation software, a paper invoice on average costs about $9 per invoice to process. And this is actually one of the steps that we like to take our prospective AvidXchange users through as we help them on their AP automation journey, is we do what we call a cost per invoice study. And so we want to look at how many users today are touching the invoices, how long are they involved in the process, and frankly, what are their salaries and costs to the company to do that. And we can actually break it down into a cost per invoice number for you. Now you can see that the automated invoice process with AvidXchange is just $1.50 per invoice versus that $9. So there's immediate cost savings that you're going to realize through automation. Same goes for the payment, and we're going to do that same process with you as well. But you can see on average that it costs $7.15 to just send that check out the door. That's what it costs to print it, stuff it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and mail it out, as opposed to an AvidXchange automated process, which is just 68 cents. And what you'll see is when we go through the software is that 68 cents includes any payment that we send out. So you're going to have some vendors that are going to want to receive an electronic payment from us. There's others that are going to want to receive a paper check. And we are very flexible in the way that we work with your vendors because we want to pay them in the way they want to be paid. In the event that they need a paper check, it's still that 68-cent fee. So when you take into account the cost of the stamp, the envelope, the check stock, and the time it takes to print it out, really that 68 cents almost becomes a wash. But our hope is to deliver a more efficient and secure process for you to be able to make those payments. So what is driving all these costs up? Well, first of all, it's the need for manual labor and all that intervention due to data errors in relation to POs and requisitions, looking for shipping or receiving documents that could otherwise be attached to the invoice within the AvidXchange system, and just simply the paper invoices themselves. And then it's just a high cost of printing and mailing all those checks. We talked about the costs that are related to check stock, ink, and even just the printers themselves and maintaining those. And labor costs typically consume 62% of the total AP cost. So while this is not a poll question, again, as we talk about ways in which you can think about your own organization, do you know how much it costs your business to process paper invoices and checks? And if you don't, we would welcome you and invite you to raise your hand and contact your rep at InterDyn BMI, and we would love to do a cost per invoice study for you so you can get a handle on that and know what your costs are to process your invoices and payments today. So additionally, we're going to help you reduce your approval cycle time. So the average approval time for a paper invoice today is between 10 and 25 days. AP automation through AvidXchange can reduce your approval time to 2 to 3 days, and those lengthy approval cycles mean that you're frankly leaving money on the table. So you might be having to pay late fees for late or missed payments, and you're really not able to capture those early paid discounts if you don't have a process that's going to allow you to be able to get that invoice paid within usually that 10-day time frame from when the invoice comes to you and is due to be paid. And so we want to help you to be able to capture those early pay discounts through the AvidXchange software. And unfortunately, only 16% of companies today always capture their early payment discounts. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's not as much of a cash flow issue as it is they just don't have the processes in place to be able to even take care of that. There are so many companies that receive so many invoices every single day that it's just too hard to get it through the process and pay it on time in order to receive that early paid discount. So moving on to the second reason that clients will utilize AP automation, the second is you're going to be able to grow your business without having to add additional AP staff. So if you're part of a growing operation and you're looking for ways to be able to scale, one big way to be able to do that is through the software. And it's not only the ability to ingest and process more invoices on a monthly basis than you would otherwise, but it's also being able to free your people up to work on other initiatives within the company to help you grow. So with a cloud solution such as AvidXchange, it's going to be highly cost-effective and scalable. There's no need to invest in expensive equipment, software, and any sort of networking tools. Everything is available within the AvidXchange software at any given time. So if you have that connection to the internet and a device, you're going to be able to log into our software at any given time. Additionally, there's no need to have to worry about updates or have to push or receive any updates through, because we make those updates to the web, and the next time you log in, those new features are available to you. And then additionally, there's really not a need to have an IT expert involved. Now, if during your process of deciding whether or not to add AvidXchange to your software portfolio, we by all means welcome anyone from your IT staff to be involved in that conversation. But the way we deploy the software and the way we work with InterDyn BMI, there's really not going to need to be a heavy level of involvement from your IT team. And so that might actually be music to their ears. And because we're in the cloud and we host all of the data for you, there's no need to maintain data storage or costly servers on-premise. So automation, as we've talked about so far, is really built for scalability. So with an automated AP process, you can more than triple the amount of invoices you can process and the checks that you can, the payments that you can make without having to add additional staff. And that allows you to grow without incurring more operational costs. So with our transactional model, you don't have to worry about any individual user licenses. And so you can have as many people on the software at any given time who need to do their job without having to worry about additional costs that come with the AvidXchange model. So just real briefly, I want to just put up a quote from one of our clients who uses AvidXchange today, and they really had three main objectives when automating with us. And the first was to develop a scalable AP process. The second was they just wanted to eliminate the paper. It creates more of a green, more of a secure environment for the invoices and payments. And then lastly, as the company grows, they wanted to gain that real-time visibility to the outstanding invoices that they have. And as we get into the software demo here in a few moments, you're going to see how we're able to do that and help you to be able to not get surprised with an invoice that might be buried on somebody's desk at the end of an accounting period for $10,000 that you didn't really have a chance to accrue or account for because nobody knew about it because it got stuck on someone's desk in the approval process. So the third reason is that we're going to greatly reduce your risk of check fraud. So we've talked a lot about the invoices up to this point, not so much of the payments. But with a paper check, your likelihood or your risk of fraudulent activity is unfortunately much higher. Now, these numbers have thankfully kind of grown over the past 3 or 4 years that AvidXchange has provided electronic payment automation to our clients. But for the first time ever, credit cards and ACH is starting to really make a dent in that check number. But as you can see, there's still 82% of companies that say they make at least 20% of their payments by check to their vendors. And that opens up the door, again, to fraud and provides real problems that a company has to deal with, again, not only in fraudulent activity, but just in not being efficient in their cash flow and making payments on time to vendors. So how does fraud happen? Well, 48% of payment fraud can be tracked back to paper checks, unfortunately, and it's just simply because the data is not secure in a paper environment. And with a check, you're really relying on some post-payment review to detect those deviations from the business rules. So whether it was someone forging a signature, whether it was someone not adhering to an approval process for the right people to approve a high dollar type of payment, by the time the fraud or the error has occurred, it's too late. The money is gone and the check has already gone out. With AvidXchange and the software that we would put into your process, you can catch that before it will ever go out the door. So with the strict adherence to rules that we can put in place, it's going to reduce the likelihood to commit that B2B fraud, because every invoice in our system is scrutinized for legitimacy before it even enters into your Dynamics GP system. So for example, if we see an invoice come in from a vendor that we don't recognize, and what's important to know is that we're going to sync back to your Dynamics GP system to pull the vendors that you're working with today into the AvidXchange software. And if we don't see a vendor that matches the invoice that we received, it's going to go into the penalty box, and an administrator is going to be notified to review it to make sure that either A, perhaps a vendor was not updated properly in the GP system and then synced over to AvidXchange, or perhaps it is a fraudulent invoice that needs to be discarded, and that will never get into your accounting system until someone's had a chance to review that. And every payment has positive pay and approval workflows that will show you, making sure that no fraud can occur. So the fourth reason, and we're going over 4 today, that clients utilize AvidXchange for their AP automation process is to eliminate the paper and tedious manual work. So hopefully this doesn't look like any of your desks that are on this call, but you can see that on average, AP staff members spend on average 4 hours a day on manual tasks related to the AP invoices, and that's a lot of time. That's a half a day, half a working day for most people, to be able to spend on areas otherwise where they could be helping the business. And so automation really does the heavy lifting. Again, there's no more opening, routing, and filing invoices. Nobody has to print and sign checks. There's no more stuffing and mailing those envelopes, and you don't need to actually manage the electronic payment type to your vendors. So many of you on this call today might be saying to yourself, well, I make ACH payments today, I make wires, I'm already starting to adopt an electronic payment process. Well, the reality is that you still have to manage that payment type, you still have to manage the remittance information. There's actually a great deal of risk that goes in having that bank account information stored on your system for paying your vendors. So with the AvidXchange system, we actually store all that information electronically from the vendors that you work with, and we manage the way in which they have to be paid. So what we'll show you here in a moment is it's very easy, it's very much hassle-free to process that payment directly from GP into the Avid Pay system, and you don't have to worry about how the vendor gets paid because they've communicated that to us. And then lastly, as a bonus, we're going to improve your audit trail. So there's no need to save documents in those filing cabinets. You don't have to worry about having a complete additional filing cabinet room with all those papers you've accumulated over the years, because everything is saved within the AvidXchange software for review at any given time for 7+ years. And you can actually add users that have read-only access. So if you go through audits with any regularity, it makes sense to just give an auditor read-only access into your system so they can pull those invoices instead of forcing your staff to have to run all those down and make copies for the auditors as well. So what you need to think about, and what we talk with every prospective AvidXchange client, is for this to be a successful implementation, it's good to think about what you would do with the extra time. And so we try to make that part of every plan. Now, a few suggestions is that you can have people who verify data for accuracy, whether it's in invoices or other financial documents that you receive on a daily basis, handling any sort of exceptions and discrepancies. Maybe you received an invoice in and you didn't get all of the product that you had ordered, or perhaps the pricing was wrong. They can look at that for you. To negotiate vendor contracts, we actually have some tools, which I'll get into, that will allow you to be able to do that, so you can easily pull the data to see how much you're actually spending with a particular vendor every month to be able to renegotiate that, or just simply plan for the future. You know, it's pretty common that we'll be in an engagement with a client who's looking at AP automation, and one of the early questions we'll ask is, did you go to school to get an accounting degree to just push around paper and scan invoices? Well, the answer is probably no. You're hoping to be able to add some some sort of feedback to the company to help them grow and be the financial professional that you went to school to be. So let's talk about and show you some of the tools that we have available. And so we'll go ahead and do a live demonstration. And the first piece that we always want to show you is what we call our Avid Bill Network. And so what this does is demonstrates how we get invoices into the system from your vendors. So you can see there's multiple ways in which we receive the invoice from the vendor. The first is as simple as just an email with an attached file of some sort. Now you might have vendors today that are emailing invoices to you, and our vendor onboarding team would just simply transition those vendors to a new email address. So often the email address is your company name at avidbill.com. We're going to receive those invoices from those vendors on your behalf. You don't have to worry about receiving those anymore, and we'll process them for you into the software. Vendors have the ability to go online and upload invoices to our system. We can receive an invoice via EDI, and if for whatever reason there are certain invoices that you want to continue to receive by paper, we give you the choice and flexibility to do that, and we show you how you can actually scan those on site if you'd like and upload those into the software. And then lastly, the box to the far right, the paper box, that's really what I like to call our secret sauce at AvidXchange. This is really what differentiates us from other AP automation and document management providers who offer AP automation as well, is when we say we're going to eliminate the paper from your life, we really mean it. And the way we do that is that for any vendor who's just incapable of submitting an invoice to us electronically in one of the other ways that we talked about, we operate 2 scanning facilities. We have one at our headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we have another on the West Coast in Southern California. And so for those vendors, we're going to ask them to route their invoices to us geographically because we want to receive those invoices as quickly as possible from them and into the system. And by the way, I'll mention that our SLA to our clients is that we are going to have an invoice ready for review and approval into your AvidXchange software within 24 hours of receipt. Now the reality is that if we receive the invoice in the morning, chances are we're going to have it ready for you by that afternoon, and if we receive it in the afternoon, we'll have it ready for you the next morning to begin to review and approve. So once we get those invoices into our software, the next thing we're going to do is actually extract all of what we call the key header data from that invoice. So this is some of the static information that gets received on every single invoice. So things like vendor names, dollar amounts, date ranges. We're going to pull all that off, and we're going to populate the AvidXchange software so it's ready for you to start working. Now, one thing that we do that's a little bit unique to AvidXchange is we actually have an AvidXchange employee review each piece of that extracted data to make sure that we populated the AvidXchange software correctly from the invoice into our user interface. So obviously, garbage in, garbage out, right? So if the information is not being pulled off the invoice correctly, it's not going to be of any use to you. So data integrity is of utmost importance to us because we want to make sure that you have all the correct information that you need in order to be able to process the invoice. Step 2 is once we pull that information off, we're going to be able to analyze and determine what workflow that invoice should go into. So with AvidXchange, you can have multiple invoice approval workflows, and they can be built on any number of business rules that you're already using today. So one of the first steps in our implementation process with a new client is we're going to ask questions around how you approve invoices today. What are the business rules? What are the drivers that determine who gets to see an invoice and when? And we're going to build those same rules within the AvidXchange software. And so once we've seen what those drivers are and we can compare it to the data that we pulled off the invoice, we can then deliver it into the AvidXchange system for you to be able to start to review and approve. So I'm going to go ahead and pull over a view of the AvidXchange software for you as well. And the first thing I want you to know is that we are mobile responsive. And so our website is able to detect what sort of device you're on. So if I'm on a phone or if I'm on a tablet, it's going to determine what size and how the website should look so you can use it with ease. Now again, as I mentioned before, there's no need for seat licenses with the AvidXchange software because you're just simply paying for the number of invoices that you process and the number of payments you make. So you can have as many people on the site at any given time without any need to worry about any additional fees that go with that. Secondly, AvidXchange is going to make your people mobile. So anyone with a smartphone, tablet, or computer with that browser and internet access is going to be able to access our software from anywhere in the world. And that goes for anyone at any level of permission, whether it's viewing, approving, coding, or making payments through the AvidXchange software. So what I'm going to do first is log in as kind of a first step approver, and a lot of times this is maybe an AP clerk who's just getting the invoice early. And so I log in, and the first thing you'll notice are these tabs at the top. And so what these tabs are intended to represent are the different levels of access that we can give users based on their permission level. So this person has a fairly low level of access into the AvidXchange system. And then when I'm ready to process invoices, I go ahead and click on my invoice button. Now the first thing you're going to notice is an approval workflow queue of invoices. And so these are all of the invoices that are awaiting this user's approval. Now one thing that we do is that we make sure that this user only sees invoices that relate to their department, for example. And as you can see, I've grabbed this and I can actually move these around if I need to. So the AvidXchange software is able to allow you to configure this view however you like. We're also only going to show you invoices that relate to your step in the approval process. So if there are people that come before you who have to first approve the invoice before it's your turn, you won't see it in this queue until they've done their work. So by doing this, it makes sure that people only see invoices that they're supposed to see and that they're not going to approve invoices out of order. So when I want to actually work the invoice itself, I just simply click on the invoice number here. And what you'll see is there's two parts to every invoice that we help every client manage. And first over here, this is the header detail that we talked about before. This is all the information that we've pulled off of the invoice for you. And then over here is the image of the invoice itself. So I can actually click these buttons and move that out of the way. And what you'll see is that this is the same invoice that you're seeing today, piling up in paper on your desk, but instead it's now on your computer screen. So whether this was 1 page or 50, it's the same invoice that you received today in its entirety and in the form and the way that the vendor sent it to us. So I can also move this screen around just a little bit. Let me give this a click, and I can drag this up. And so when I'm ready to actually code and distribute the invoice, I have more room. And you can actually split an invoice out of, across a number of different ways. You could do it by percentage. You can do it by dollar amount. You have the ability to add as many lines of detail as you like to any sort of invoice that you need to cut it across different departments or jobs. And then one thing to note too is that we are going to pull the GL codes that you use today from your GP software to make sure that you're using the same codes that you're comfortable with. So whatever codes you use, whatever you're comfortable with, we're going to map to those to make the software simple to use, because our goal is really all about low to no change management to make that transition to the AvidXchange software as simple as possible. Now we do have a couple settings that will make the coding easier within AvidXchange. The first is that you can take a GL code and you can attach it to a vendor in their profile, and the system's going to code that invoice the same way every single time. So this is really useful for vendors like utility providers, for example. The electric bill comes in, it gets coded to the electric bill GL code. You just simply review it and then approve it and move it on its way. Secondly, we have a feature we call smart coding. And with smart coding, the system's going to look at these by vendor, location, and even department. And so when you make this setting active, when an invoice comes into a certain location and gets coded for the very first time, the system's going to remember that and default to that coding setting for future invoices. Now, if you do use a different code in the future, because you can always override some of those assumptions that the software might make for you. So as I hover over this, what you can see is that this is a electrical supplies code, and I can actually change this to plumbing. And I have the ability to dynamically search for a different code. And so here's my plumbing supplies code. And so now the system will actually remember going forward to use this code instead. You can see that it was successfully saved. Now, these can be turned on and off at the vendor level. So if it does create a headache to do this for a certain vendor, let's just say that they don't have the same codes that regularly relate to their invoices, you just turn that default setting off, and then you would code the invoice as normal right here within the AvidXchange coding screen. Now, another great thing about using AvidXchange is we're going to give you visibility into your invoices that you may not have today. And so as you can see here, as I click on the Workflow tab, is that you get as many steps in an approval process as you choose. And when this process is created, it's going to make somebody in the organization personally responsible for each of these steps and gives you visibility to where the invoice is, who's holding on to it, and who still needs to approve it. Now, additionally, over here in the History tab, from the moment that invoice hits our system, we're going to track each step in the approval process and any changes that might have taken place along the way to it. So here's the invoice that we're working on right now, and you can see all the steps that have gone into getting this invoice through the system and approved. Now, I'll point out anywhere you see the word system here, This is essentially stopping and starting a timer. Now, there's going to be some people in your organization that may love this next feature. There's others that may not be so crazy about it. But what it does is essentially allows you to put your people on timers. So you can set up a time frame in which someone has to approve an invoice that's hit their queue. And if they exceed that allotted time, then an administrator is notified, and then you can decide what action you want to take to get that invoice approved in the timely fashion. So when we talk about helping you being able to approve your invoices more quickly, this is one of the features that allows you to do that and has the visibility into any sort of aging that is happening to the invoice. Now, additionally, people hold on to invoices for longer than that allotted time, and it's for a perfectly legitimate reason, and that's why we have this log a comment section here. And this essentially works as an internal email system, and so I can use this to communicate with people internally. I can also do it externally. So perhaps you want to communicate to a vendor that you were shorted some of your product on a delivery, and so you're going to be either short paying the invoice or they need to produce a new one and send it to you. But you can put any sort of comments you want in here. Now, I will tell you that part of our offering is that because it provides some strict audit detail, that once I hit log a comment, that is in there forever. So we've actually had some clients who have asked us if we can go back and clean out a previous comment. Perhaps they were not the happiest with one of their vendors and they made a comment that wasn't the nicest to them in the comment section. Now, your vendors don't see this, but people within the company will. But just know that these comments are in here forever in terms of auditing purposes. But in addition to hitting log a comment, and not only is it captured within the software, but it's also going to send out an email to whoever you address that to, and they're going to get the note that you put on the invoice. And you also have a link that's going to take you right back to the AvidXchange software to where you can go in, review the note, and put one in of your own. Now, 3 things that I want to point out where we make an immediate impact on our users' AP lives is that first, you're going to be able to start to accrue for your expenses the moment that invoice leaves the vendor and hits our system, instead of waiting for it to be entered into the accounting system or trying to estimate. So we talked earlier about that $10,000 invoice that was buried underneath a pile of papers on somebody's desk. Those days are over, because as soon as it hits our system, whether it's even been viewed or even started to approve, you can pull an accrual report at any given time to see what sort of charges are coming down the line within that accounting period. Secondly, our approval process on average is just 2.8 days, and so you can expect that the invoices are going to go from the vendor and into the accounting system in less than 3 days. And lastly, there's no more conversations around where's that invoice, who has it, why hasn't it been approved. You're going to have full visibility to the information around each of your invoices, so there's no more starting that fire drill to look for an invoice, who's got it, the vendor's calling and hassling accounting, an individual location, maybe they found the number of the CEO somehow just because they're trying to find information on the status of their current invoice. So I'm now done with my step in the approval process, and so all I have to do is go up and hit this approve button, and you can see that it's approving. And that's it. It's now loaded my next invoice in my queue and sent it over to me to start working. Now, you'll notice that I didn't have to tell the system anything else. So users don't have to know the next step in the approval process to move it along its way, which reduces the likelihood of an invoice being misrouted either by mistake or worse, on purpose. So again, this is another area of potential fraud in a paper-based AP automation system, is that users can try to bypass managers and they can try to get an invoice into an accounting system and pay a fraudulent vendor perhaps they've set up. But with the AvidXchange software, users don't have any ability to bypass administrators, to bypass managers who might be able to identify that fraud because the AvidXchange system doesn't allow them to. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and log out of this user, and we're going to show you real quickly what the second step in the approval process, or what we'd say was the final step in the approval process, looks like. And I'm going to log in as an administrator. And the first thing that you'll likely notice are the tabs up here at the top have stretched all the way across the screen, so just demonstrating the greater level of access this user has, this administrator has, to the different AvidXchange modules versus that first user. So as I click on my invoices button, I get the same queue that we saw earlier, and down here is the invoice that we were just working on. And so now it's worked its way into my queue for approval. And I can go in and I can drill into this invoice if I want, but once I've reviewed a number of invoices, if I'm ready to approve them in bulk, I can just checkbox the ones that I want to send on its way into an approval process and hit approve. And you can see that while this is only one invoice we process, this is our bulk approval status window, and it's going to show you each of the invoices that were approved successfully. So now as I close this, you'll see that this invoice has now dropped out of my queue. So once an invoice has worked its way all the way through the approval process, it's now ready to be what we call batched. So as I go back to my earlier screen with my tabs, because I have the authority to go into a batching screen, I'm going to do that. And what you can see is I have a number of different batches that some are open, some are closed, but these represent different groups of invoices that have already been set in or are ready to be sent in into your accounting system. So we have certain clients that will use these batches in different ways. Some will decide to batch and export their invoices daily, some weekly. Some will accumulate them over the course of an accounting period and do them all at once. Point being is it's completely up to you. We don't put you under a process that we decide for you. It's your business. We want you to be able to process the invoices and send them into the accounting system when you're ready. So down here I have 203 invoices that are ready to be batched into your GP system. And at this point, all I would do is just hit close. And then if I were to hit export, what it would do is take all 203 of those invoices and export them to your GP system where they would be applied to the AP module in 2 to 4 seconds as if someone had keyed each one in individually. So that many invoices probably would take someone all day to be able to enter all those in. So when we talk about helping you save time, this is just one of those ways in which we hope to do that. Let me show you one other feature too in reference to being able to track down and look for invoices that you've already approved. So as I go back into our invoice screen, you'll see that I can use my little magnifying glass here to locate a particular invoice number on demand, and it's going to locate that for me. But this screen up here really almost works as a custom report writing tool. So I have the ability to search for any block of invoices I choose by any of the criteria that you see up here above. So I could do it by its current status, I could do it by a vendor name, or I could just simply look for a block of invoices by date. So if I want to go back in time here, and I want to see all of the invoices that have gone through the system since the first of the year to today, I can do that, and you'll see on demand, let me get this number out of here, that on demand it's going to look for all of those invoices that meet their criteria. You'll notice that I left the invoice number, and so that's going to be the number one determining factor is of what it's going to look for. It's going to try to cross all of these fields together to locate the right invoice for you. So I pulled all the invoices since the first of the year to today, and now I have a couple of choices what I do with this information. I can simply export it if I choose, so this could just be to an Excel spreadsheet, a flat file, for example. And these are really great for things like contract negotiation or budget time that I talked about earlier. If you want to be able to pull on demand the amount of spend that you have done with a particular vendor to renegotiate rates, we can easily show that to you based on the invoices they've sent you. You also have the ability to create a report within the AvidXchange system. And so what I do is I select the invoices that I want in my report. I could do all of them at once, or I could just simply select a handful here, and then I click Create a Report. And you'll see that it's also going to ask me what data I want to have on my report. So I hit my Create button, and that's going to pull a PDF file for me that's going to display all of these invoices for me that I've requested. And so our first page is our invoice summary showing each of the invoices. As I scroll down, it's going to give me detail related to each of these invoices I pulled, shows me all of the coding, shows me who is involved in each step in the approval process, and then lastly, the image of the invoice itself. And so again, if you are a company that goes through audits with any regularity, this is probably the sort of thing that auditors are going to be looking for. And this is really what makes the pain of going through an audit so much less painful using the AvidXchange software, because again, you can get these on demand and search for them in any way you need. Again, I'll point out that if you want to give an auditor read-only access, you can do that with AvidXchange at no additional charge and let them be the one that search for the invoices instead of you. So that gives us a brief overview of the invoice product. Now, I want to take a moment and just walk you through our Avid payment product. And so I'm going to pull over this demonstration screen for you. And the first thing we want to point out is that Avid Pay is just simply a module that's available within the AvidXchange system. So all you do is just simply log in. And we talked about the tabs earlier. And if you're an authorized user for Avid Pay, it's going to show up as a tab, and you just simply log in. So when I log into the Avid Pay system, the first thing I'm going to notice are all the previous batches of payments that I've already made. And so as I click into my first batch, what I can see is it's going to give me details around the check numbers, the types of payments that went to the vendor, and the dollar amount. Now, one thing that's important to understand is that the way Avid Pay works is very similar to the way you're probably cutting checks inside your GP system today. So right now you go into the accounting system, you're probably doing a selection process, a check registry, deciding what bank accounts to pay out of, and then when you've located the payments you want to make, you just simply send those payments to the printer and it spits out a check. Well, with the Avid Pay system, it works exactly like that, except instead of pushing that file to the printer, you're actually going to push it to us. Now, there's different ways in which we integrate Avid Pay with different accounting systems, and we have tools that allow that integration to work seamlessly, one of which is we're going to actually grab a file that's been pushed into the Avid Pay network. So I'm going to select that file and open it and send it into Avid Pay. And so what you can see is that we've now received 12 payments from the GP system, and they're currently validating. So when I open this batch of payments, the first thing you'll notice is that the whole point of Avid Pay is this column right here, that we go through payment by payment and determine which vendor accepts an electronic payment and which requires a paper check. So we have this large database of vendors. It's in excess of 300,000. They've signed up with us. They've told us they want to receive an electronic payment. So if they're in that database, we simply make an electronic payment. If they're not, we're going to cut a check from one of our check printing facilities, stuff it in an envelope, and mail it out the door for you on your behalf. So by maintaining this large database of vendor payment information, you can see that the software goes through automatically, payment by payment, and identifies those vendors that accept the electronic payment and those that require the paper check. So again, you are relieved of the duties of having to keep track of the remittance information, who gets paid in what way, and you don't have to be charged with keeping that information secure related to the vendor's bank account on your system. Avid Pay secures that for you in ours. Now here's the thing though, even though these payments have been selected for payment, they don't necessarily go out the door yet, because if you're anything like our other clients, you probably have a check approval process before the payment can go out. So as I click on this approval tab, this is pretty much our automated version of check signing. So when I go into this approval screen, you can see that there's 2 payments that have been queued up. So you have the ability to create an approval process that says if it's over a certain amount, it might require 2 approvals, or if it's a certain type of payment, it's a different approval process itself. Now, these payments here, although they've been selected as an e-payment or a paper check, they still require the authority of someone to approve them. So I can go on this screen, I can actually expand this payment, and I can see that I'm paying 3 invoices. It would give me my dollar amount, and it would give me the invoices that they're tied to. So as you can see here, this first one's for $169, this last one's for $48, but this one over $10,000 might give me pause, and so I want to find out more about that. So if this were a live Avid Pay account tied into the AvidXchange system, I could actually click on this invoice number. It would take me back to my AvidXchange invoice screen over here, as you can see, and then I'd be able to review all the due diligence around the approval of that invoice, who was involved, and how did it get distributed, for example. So once I'm comfortable with everything I viewed, I can simply close this batch up. I would highlight it, I'd approve it, and then it goes on its way. And again, I'll reiterate that if you do have a 2-step approval process for payments over a certain dollar amount, that payment would then hit the next check signer or approver's queue for them to review, and then that second approval would then issue the payment or the payment process to the vendor. So Kim, I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint screens here, and I think we're getting ready to launch another poll, and that is after you've seen the AvidXchange demonstration and the points that we brought up, what are your next steps in your AP automation journey?
All right, everybody, let's go in. It reminds me of is how I pay bills at home here through my bank.
That's exactly right. And a lot of times, Kim, I love in presentations to groups, which we love to do at AvidXchange, the first question I'll ask is, how many people at home pay your bills in some sort of banking system through, say, a Bank of America, a Wells Fargo, maybe a credit union you work with, and usually hands go up all across the room. And I said, how many of you love it when you have someone, a plumber shows up and they do some work in your home and they ask for a check? and the hands all go down. So we're trying to put that same environment that you enjoy today with your personal banking and give you that same convenience in your business-to-business payments.
Yep, it's so easy. It takes minutes doing your bills, so I love it. All right. Besides that, we try to go green, right?
That's right.
All right, everybody. 63% of you have voted. I'm going to close this down. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, go ahead and share it. It looks like I want to see a personalized product demonstration, or I'm just doing some research right now, which is a good step. So this is great, and I want to see more information. So let's talk.
Hi, this is Hannah from AvidXchange, and it looks like Paul has lost his audio. So if Paul, maybe if you can still hear me, if you could advance the slide for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Hannah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
Then I think we've lost Kim. So Kim, are you still on the line?
Looks like we're having some technical difficulties.
Okay. So I think
First one that we received was, how does this integrate with Dynamics GP?
Yeah, great question. And so with Dynamics GP, we actually have a web service that makes it simple and easy to use. We would work with InterDyn BMI as your partner to make sure that it's all deployed correctly. But essentially, once the deployment is done, all you do is simply export those batch of invoices as we showed you in the screen earlier, and then the system automatically, the GP system automatically sees those as received, and then we'll apply them to your AP module as if they were individual AP vouchers and populates your AP module that way.
Paul, I'm back. Sorry about that. My phone just went dead there for a second.
There you go.
All
Great.
Right.
That's all right.
All right. We got another question here from Martin. It is, how does the payment information get back to Great Plains from the Avid Pay module?
Yeah, great question. And so the first step to understand is that we're actually going to use the same check number sequence that you use today. And so again, we're not going to change the way that you're identifying those payments that you want to make within your GP system. You're still going to use the check number sequence, and maybe you have multiple bank accounts in which you pay. So the first step to know is that as that check number is identified and sent to our system, the system is going to see that the invoice that you've highlighted is paid under that check number. And then we actually have a tool called Avid Sync that's going to work back and forth between the Avid Pay system and your GP system to give you the status of that payment and show that it's paid. Another thing that's important to know is that when we withdraw those funds from your bank account to make those payments, we actually will pull them as individual drafts and not one lump sum payment. So if you make, say, 10 payments for $5,000 today, we're not going to just pull $5,000. We're going to pull 10 individual drafts. So then you can go back and easily reconcile that bank statement at the end of the month to make sure that everything was cleared the way it should have.
How to be done. Excellent. So that you may have just answered this question here that came from somebody is, how do you have AvidXchange invoice and payment integrate into GP? Yeah, great question. Yes, we did answer that. So it's just a simple web service, and with the help of InterDyn BMI to make sure that we're that everything is aligned correctly to their version of Dynamics GP. It's just a simple telling the AvidXchange system to export it. The GP system will see that a file has come its way, will ingest it, and automatically apply it to the AP module. All right. Here's another new one. Can you restrict the account code selection by AvidXchange user? I believe we can. I believe we have the ability to restrict by, say, department, for example,
what GL codes that a user can use. So obviously, if you want to make sure that users don't get confused on which codes they're supposed to be using, we can set them up to where the department will be the driver based on the GL codes that will be available to them.
All right. And here's a good question from somebody, and it has to do with because it sounds so individualized, which is awesome. And it is, how long does something like this take to implement?
Yeah, great question. And so with AvidXchange, we offer a 45-day implementation guarantee. And so what that means is that we're going to have AvidXchange, whether it's the invoice or the payment product or both that you decide to implement, we're going to have you up and running in 45 days or less. Now, there's going to be some help that we're going to need from you along the way, because again, as we talked about earlier, we're going to need to know a little bit about your business and how you want to have the system to work, because we tailor it to you. But as long as together we're able to meet those checkpoints and have those discussions, we know that we'll have you up and running in 45 days or less.
That's fantastic. All right, no other questions in the queue. So I know you've got some more information you wanted to share with everybody as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Last thing we want to make sure that you know is that everyone in attendance today and anyone who views this this copy, this webinar, is we'd love to supply you with a complimentary copy of our ebook, AP Automation for Microsoft Dynamics GP Users. Hannah, who you heard a minute ago, is on the call, and there is her email. So we'd like to send this out to anyone who would like it on this webinar. You can simply email her or just contact your InterDyn BMI rep if you want to as well, if that's easier for you, and we'll get you a copy of that. So Kim, we're so appreciative again for the time today. I'll let you wrap things up, but you can see our contact information there on the screen, and thank you to everyone for giving us some time.
Excellent. And again, everybody, we have been recording today's presentation.